Thank you, Amber. Good afternoon, everyone. We are pleased to be with you today. This workshop has been designed to allow for some open conversation, dialogue, addressing the myths and misinformation about DEI in 2024. So as we get started, just some general housekeeping guidelines. We will be utilizing the hand raise button. Please keep your cameras on when possible and make sure that your mics are muted until you're ready to speak. And before speaking, please share with us your name, location, and your job title. So when we take a look at the agenda for today, we will be discussing the historical insights. Why is DEI being targeted? We'll look at those myths. We'll do some myth busting. We'll also talk about the trends for DEI. And we'll end with key points and takeaways and address any other questions and answer period that anyone might have. And again, this is an open conversation, so please feel free at any time to share your feedback, come unmuted when you need to or desire to.
Before we dive into today's discussions, we'd love to hear some of your thoughts and some of your perspective. And basically, we just want to know who we have in the audience today. So we'd like for you to take a moment. We have a few polling questions that Amber is going to launch for us, and your input is definitely going to be beneficial in helping us to shape the conversations that we're having today. So please take a moment to complete the polling questions. This is an anonymous poll, and at the conclusion of the poll, we will place the polling results so that everyone can see them. Here, we'll allow a few more minutes for everyone to participate, or those who choose to participate. And we shall be getting started here shortly.
Question 2 should be coming up.
The polls are set up separately, so there are a total of 5 poll questions. The first poll question has been answered, and I'm sharing the results.
Okay, and you can move on to the next questions just to allow everyone to see the results, and then we'll move on.
Okay, in the essence of time, let's go ahead and let's just stop the poll here at number 2, because we want to make sure we have enough time to go through all of the content for today's discussion. So Amber, if you would, just do not launch any additional polls. We have number 1 and number 2. And if we have time at the end, we'll do 3, 4, and 5. Okay, so Just to kind of get into some of the historical insights around DE&I, I think it's important to just really discuss where this originated from, because there are a lot of misconceptions out in the community today, and we just want to kind of level set where we are starting from. We all pretty much understand, the people in this audience, it is our hope that you understand that DEI, it involves creating spaces where everyone feels respected, everyone feels supported, everyone feels empowered to contribute to their unique perspectives, whatever those perspectives may be. But still, today, and if you look in the media today, you will see that DEI is still being targeted as something that is harmful and something that is undesirable. DEI essentially transcends across all generational lines. Now, I'd like to share a quick story with you before we get too deep into the discussion. Number one, I can't believe that the summer is almost over. The world is moving so fast these days. But over the summer, just like a lot of you, I did a little vacation and I had the pleasure of visiting my family down in rural Georgia, down in Southwest Georgia, during a time that I can honestly say must have been the hottest 3 days I've ever experienced in my life. It was scorching out there. The ambient temperatures were like 100 degrees, and the killer mosquitoes, if you know about Georgia and the mosquitoes and the gnats, yeah, they were on full assault that day. So I have a third cousin. So this is my cousin's grandson. He just graduated from Georgia Tech in Atlanta, Georgia, and we had an opportunity to just sit down and have a brief conversation. He got his degree in engineering. And I applauded him and gave him a whole bunch of kudos and said, hey, that's a great opportunity. You got a lot to do. What are your next steps? And then out of nowhere, he asked me a question. He said, look here, big cuz, what do you think about all of this new DE&I banter going on in the country today? Of course, I was kind of surprised when he asked me that question because, first of all, you're in Georgia and you know this stuff can't be new. But I say, all right, let's sit down, let's have a discussion. And when I talk to him, these are some of the things that I discussed with him. While DE&I might seem like it's a new concept that's gaining momentum every day, it roots back to much to something that is much further. DEI is deeply connected to the 1960s civil rights movement. And back then, people were fighting for some of the same things and same principles that we are hearing today, whether it's from a political perspective or if it's just from a human rights perspective. Understanding that this history helps us to see that today's DE&I efforts are part of something that is long going. When you look at some of the names of the individuals who are part of the civil rights movement who are no longer here, this is something that is long going. So let me take you back to some of those earlier days and some of those early initiatives that DEI actually establishes roots from. DEI is rooted in the 1960s civil rights movement under the Johnson and the President Johnson administration. And some of those laws that went into play during that time are the Equal Pay Act of 1963, Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Equal Employment Opportunity Act of 1972, the Pregnancy Discrimination Act of 1978, and the American Disabilities Act of 1990, which just had a birthday of over 60 years. Now, although the effectiveness of some of the EEOC initiatives came a little later on and they kind of got a little stagnant during the Reagan administration, I can honestly say that the acronym DE&I became mainstream as a result of the 2020 murder of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor. We can't forget her. In response to some of the public pressure for corporate social accountability in the wake of Black Lives Matter movement, many organizations, including some of the big name organizations like Google, Nike, or Wells Fargo, they began appointing chief diversity officers to oversee what has been cemented as a new way forward in response to the civil rights education and movement that was going on. So, with the background of DE&I being rooted in law, the question that I have is, why is DE&I being targeted?
So we know the saying that we must know our past and where we've been. in order to understand where we're going and to ensure that we're able to measure our progress. Understanding our history and the history of DEI and its solid roots, and being intentional in our strategies, our responses, will help us continue this movement, this move really of this work forward. And so can you ask why DE&I is being targeted? I have my reasons why I believe it's being targeted. One of them is right here. The population is aging. And as such, this population, this is a graph that was developed, came out of the US Census in 2017. You best believe that our folks that are sitting at our lawmakers that are sitting around the tables, our billionaires that are making decisions, that are holding purse strings, have reviewed this data, and they know that we are aging, that the US is aging. And what does that play with DE&I? Well, how many of you on here are baby boomers? Just by a show of hands. Any baby boomers here? Well, by 2030, anyone considered a baby boomer will be over the age of 65. And oh, by the way, baby boomers happen to be the largest demographic of people that make up our American, our US population. And as such, as we're aging, that means we're also dying pretty quickly as well, okay? You can move to the next slide. And the other portion of that is because of the deaths, there's also going to be a demographic shift also happening in 2030. There will be less natural births in the US, but our population is going to continue to increase because of the influx of immigrants. And if you look at this slide, you'll notice that the births and where the children are under 18, where that growth is happening at compared 2016 to 2060 and beyond, okay? It's really there with the larger, the Hispanic group. We're browning, and the Asians and the mixed groups. It's actually showing that there will be more births of people with two or more races. Again, why is this important to DEI? Because DEI promotes folks coming together. DEI promotes inclusiveness. DEI wants people to have equal access, equity in access, a seat at the table, the ability to make decisions. And the lawmakers and the old billionaires that are sitting around the table are not too happy about that. So tell me, what do some of you think some of the reasons why DEI is being targeted? Feel free to come off mute or raise your hand.
I think it's a trend that tracks with this country. And when things don't go well, they just blame people of color and try to restrict them. But DEI, in essence, is challenging the foundation of this country, and people feel attacked.
People feel threatened. Thank you. And that was Alyssa?
Elsa.
Elsa, okay. And Elsa, where are you from?
I don't even know how to answer that. I'm in LA right now.
Where's your location and your job title?
I'm in Los Angeles, and I am a bilingual DEI manager for McCarthy Holdings.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Rochelle?
Good afternoon. My name is Rochella Neely, and I am in Highland, Indiana. And I'm currently a branch manager for a financial institution. And my personal belief as to why DEI is being attacked is because it's due to fear. As you said, there certain individuals that are in power have this data and they know that things are changing and that is based off of fear. And so they want to try to dismantle that as much as they possibly can. That's my personal opinion.
Thank you. And Catherine?
Hi, so I'm Catherine, and I am in Seattle, Washington. I'm a staff development coordinator for a facility with individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. I'm wondering, hold on a second, if there's two windows that can, if that makes it better. Yes, it does. Yeah, I was echoing on myself for a second. I think a lot of it has to do with this, like it has to do with discomfort, that people feel uncomfortable with tough conversations sometimes. And sorry, there we go. Let me fix this again. That like I think sometimes we have to recognize our role sometimes in perpetuating inequities, and that that kind of leaning into realizing that we could be better, that we could do better, is something that people just want to think they're already doing okay. And so I think that there's this like, because it doesn't always feel, even though it's bringing in an inclusivity, the need to sometimes be better and do better creates a discomfort that people don't want to look at a mirror or look at themselves. And so I think they will kind of shut it down. And I think that, like, for me, at least in my work, pre-2020, there were DEI efforts happening. We had programs, we had things going on, but it had to happen in a way that everyone had to be comfortable. That anytime we had conversations that were uncomfortable, there was drama. I got in trouble. I got called to the table about, hey, you've had these conversations, that people are feeling targeted, meaning white people were feeling targeted. And that you need to find ways that people could feel comfortable, because I don't want people feeling uncomfortable. And then I'd say George Floyd happened. And for a moment, because we were all kind of a little bit more at computers, because we were feeling like paying more attention to things, there was a moment of slowdown. And Breonna Taylor, that there was this like, oh, we all need to be uncomfortable now, so it's okay to be uncomfortable. And that was brief. I think that there's still some resistance back to, now that time has passed between 2020, now we're in 2024, we're sort of slipping back into that, oh, but we don't really want to be uncomfortable again. So I think there's a little bit of this resistance to having challenging questions or things, and to have any accountability that maybe sometimes we're part of the problem when we all are at times.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you very much. Did anyone else want to mention anything? Toki, I think you saw your camera on.
Yeah.
If not, I agree with all of you and what you've shared, and even more so the fact that as we age and as we continue to brown, there's another challenge with the DE&I, right? We look at the things that are going on politically, and we talk about women and their rights and the rights of, and you can move the next slide, women's reproduction rights. DE&I had an influence and has been influenced by the laws that have come out. We all think about health equity, and we think about the right to services. Well, what about women's reproduction rights? How does this play a role in DE&I? Well, if you look at some studies, it would make you believe that the majority of people that are having abortions or people of color. Yet, when you do a population study and look to see how many people, women, are in the United States, and then break them down by their races, we would find that 58% of the women within the United States are Caucasian, okay? 58%. So, and then those that are Black are 14%, those that are Hispanic are 21%, and it goes on down in numbers from there. The point that I'm getting to with this is reproduction rights play a role because of the Browning. Those lawmakers, those billionaires that want to hold on to the power and want to keep the systemic discriminations and inequities in place would like to have more Europeans within this country and more European births. Okay? Does anyone have any questions about what I'm saying there? Do I need to go into it a little bit further? That is another reason why DE&I is being targeted. Next slide.
So we understand why DE&I is being targeted. Now, what I like to do is take a moment to just review some of those myths that we hear when it comes down to DE&I. And I like to talk about something that's been in the news a lot recently, right? And it's the debate around remote work and DE&I. So I'm an HR person by trade. And so this kind of resonated with me. And I've been a remote worker for over 8 years. So this really resonated with me, right? I mean, who doesn't like attending a Zoom meeting with gym shorts and a jacket on, right? That's the way to go, right? But some people argue that remote work, it kind of levels the playing field and it naturally increases diversity and equity and inclusion in the workforce as well. But others believe that it creates some type of barrier or isolation. Now, there might be a little truth to that on both sides, right? But this is just one example of how some of the myths and the misconceptions can shape our understanding of DE and I. Let's explore some of the other myths that you may have seen or heard. Let's start with this one here. Diversity is divisive. Now, I will definitely reach out to the group because I don't know everything, but I do know that diversity, from my perspective, is definitely not divisive. So why do you think that this may be a myth that's being placed out there in the universe? And some people are actually latching on to this. Diversity itself is divisive. Anyone? Raise your hand, come off mic, share your perspectives, please.
And how would you debunk it?
How would I debunk that? Well, when you think about diversity, I would not say that it's divisive. I think it's just the opposite, right? Because when you bring more people into an organization, and then also when you have more people participating in the strategic planning of the work that you do, that thought leadership is something that transcends or intersect among all people, regardless whether your race, gender, or if you're neurodiverse, everyone has an opportunity to participate based on the foundations and the strategy of DE&I. So to me, that's like the total opposite of being divisive. In fact, it kind of brings everyone together as opposed to being divisive. What do you think about that?
I'd like to hear from our attendees. Would anyone like to share?
I think, first of all, I think it's somewhat repetitive of what I was saying before, but I think sometimes it helps to start that conversation around why people are saying it first. So a little bit of saying like diversity is divisive because you're trying to tell me that I'm a bad person. Diversity is divisive because you're trying to say that by talking about this, some people are being elevated and some people are being put down. Because if you're looking at a historical perspective, then people coming into the room we're talking about equity, we're asking people who have had things to recognize that they've had things, to maybe step back a little bit so that people who haven't had can step up. Well, that dynamic is a challenging dynamic to have. And so I think sometimes it can say it's divisive because you're asking me to let go of things and I'm asking you to take on other things. And so I think that if that's the perspective that's coming at me, it's a matter of saying, right now, I'm not asking you to do anything other than be aware.
Mhm. And I think
And that's the
of
kind of
the-
starting point of just being able, can you see what other people have been through? Can you see how you have experienced your life? Can you increase your awareness? And can you hear the voice of the people in the room that you haven't heard? And particularly, I think when we get into that interesting, like, what does it mean when, and I'm going to use the word mansplaining for a better, for lack of a better thing, but like because I can say from my own experiences that if a woman says something and a man doesn't listen and then says the same thing to then repeat what the woman has said, if we have that moment to say, hey, can you hear that those words actually came from this woman, and can we elevate that? Can we see now it's actually more inclusive and everything else? So it's just that it's challenging us to lift up voices and then see where we can be better, and that ultimately kind of come together with our shared mission of, we're going to have better businesses, we're going to have better ideas, we're going to make more money, everybody wants more money, like all the things that we can kind of start to see that big picture, that it's all about, we're going to be unstoppable when we have diversity rocking. But it matters, you got to kind of sometimes talk about those little power things that start to happen that can be kind of complex.
Right.
So,
Thank
yeah.
you, Catherine.
So you just really validated that is the opposite of divisive.
That's right. That's right.
Exactly.
And I
So,
noticed that
Ali,
Aaliyah has her hand raised. Did you want to
yes.
say something? And we could maybe keep comments down to maybe about 30 seconds if possible, 45 at the most. Aaliyah?
It's that passion.
Okay. Ken, you can go ahead.
All right. So there are some other perceptions that are out there as well. Let's take a look at another one. This one is interesting. Discriminatory against whites. DE&I is discriminatory against whites. Well, Catherine, she just kind of put it in perspective with her previous comment. But, when I see this, it didn't really resonate with me, because based on my studying in HR and in the DEI space, I know that some people who do not identify as a person of color or is not part of the BIPOC community have been able to benefit because of DE&I, especially professional women, right? Right now, we probably have more women CEOs in the space than we have ever had in the history of this country. And then also by DE&I programs such as, immersion programs, internships, apprenticeships, professional development programs has not only been able to upskill people from the BIPOC community, but everyone has been able to participate in that as well. So that discriminatory against whites, I don't know. I guess it's a matter of perspective and where you stand. Go ahead. What'd you say, B?
I just said not so much.
Yeah, well, yeah, I like to stay, it's a matter of perspective. It depends on who you're talking to and how they actually see the world, And the next one, the political movement, I think we're going to skip that one, Brenda. I don't even want to get into that one.
Yes.
But loss of control or autonomy, Catherine, again, you must got the cheat sheet because you hit every one of these for the most part, right? Loss of control. That's what it's really about. And I think that by looking at loss of control as a DE&I myth, what DE&I actually does is it kind of spreads the love across the entire organization. Everyone has a particular role. And I'll give you an example of this, right? One of the most popular events that happened in the last month or two was the Olympic basketball tournament. Remember, LeBron James, Steph Curry, all of those individuals is doing great things to try and win the gold medal. Now, when Steve Kerr benched Jason Tatum, who's an outstanding player in his own rights, right? He got a lot of kickback because everybody was saying, well, how come you don't have him in the game? Remember when he benched Embiid? He said, why you don't have Embiid in the game, right? But Steve Kerr was looking at a bigger picture, right? He wanted to make sure, based on the data, right? Because all our decisions are made from data, based on the data that his assistant coaches had, he came to the determination of, I need to have this particular person in the game with this particular team in order to improve the chances of us winning. It's not about individual glorification. We can have one guy in the game that can score 50 points, but if we lose, it doesn't mean anything. And that's what it's about. It's about a level of control. And he was able to minimize that level of control by bringing people in to do exactly what they needed to do in each described situation. The next one,
And leveraging the talent of the
leveraging the talent. Exactly. Thanks for that. Yeah. Social equalities have been achieved. Well, if you think social equalities have been achieved, then I don't know where you live, because here in America, that is something that we're working on continually, right? It doesn't matter. There's always going to be something that we could work on, because you have to look at who controls, look at the power dynamics of this country. And then you will be able to identify that there's always something that we can work on. Anyone else have any input on this about the social equalities have been achieved already?
How
Right?
would you debunk that?
Yeah. How would you counter that if you're a DEI professional, HR professional, and someone said, why do we have DE&I programs? Why do we have employee resource groups? We already have met our social equalities in the world or in this country. How would you debunk that? Mr. Lee Hodge from Pueblo County, DHS, I could see the answer in your eyes, my friend. Come share some knowledge with us, sir.
I wish I had an answer, but really, as you said, I think that we make decisions based upon data, and the data doesn't suggest to us that there are that people have equal space at the table. It doesn't suggest to us that we have equitable access to the same quality of jobs and leadership positions, or that we're equally represented in all the different spaces. And until we start seeing improvements in some of those numbers, we have these conversations all the time, but yet we see the data remain constant. Until the data starts to change, I don't think that we can say that somehow or another we've achieved social equality without the data changing.
That's right. And you know something, Lee? What you just said is something that I'll mention a little later, but I want to say it now as well. We have to make sure that we're leading with the data. Let the data direct us. Let that be the start of our conversations, right? Let's talk about the number. Let's talk about that business case.
Well, since we're talking about numbers, let's go to this next one. That DE&I is just a quota system, right? Well, let's look at the word quota, right? A quota is a fixed, right? It's a fixed numerical requirement that must be met. So is DEI a quota, or would you say that DEI is a goal? Or can it be a combination of both, depending on how the employer or the leadership chooses to use it?
But we definitely don't want it to be a quota, right? It's not a quota. And we are looking at, we have to use the term diversity and say that diversity, when you're looking to diversify your funds, that's a great thing. So why wouldn't you want to diversify your staff? Why wouldn't you want to have different perspectives, different skill sets to make the team even better? So not necessarily, not even a number, but we're looking for the skills. We're looking for the different backgrounds, because the different backgrounds, the different skills bring more to the table.
Absolutely. Thanks for that. That's spot on. I just want to acknowledge Josiah's comment in the chat when he said that DEI is also more than just social equalities. And that is so true. When you look at all of the internal and external dimensions of DE&I, it's much more than the social component of how we get along or how we don't get along, right? And then Lexi also put that DEI is a process or a mode of operating, not a quota. So thanks for that feedback as well. And then what makes us different makes us better together. That is something that we've heard so many times before. So looking at the next myth, Caucasian students are harmed by diversity, equity, and inclusive initiatives, right? DE&I creates a more inclusive environment for all students. I know white students who have gotten minority scholarships to go to HBCUs, so I don't know how they can be harmed. Anyone else have any input on that? Because I know some things happen all across the country and some things are remote. And here in the great state of North Carolina, which is where I'm from, we have some of the most, HBCUs in the country. And I personally know white students who have benefited from diversity programs by going to HBCUs or even other opportunities as well. What have you heard anything about this one, Brenda?
What I would say that it's really about, again, leading with the data and showing that since the Supreme Court dismantled affirmative action last June, look at the numbers of applicants across the United States of the entering into colleges of our BIPOC freshmen. Those numbers have dropped. Why? Okay, who's being harmed from that? It's not Caucasian students. Okay. I can tell you who's benefiting, but who's being harmed.
He's alive. What's up?
Comments from
Okay.
anyone?
No, somebody got a hot mic there, but
Okay, so one of the things that I think that we as DEI professionals have done and we can improve on for sure is making sure that we're clearly explaining what equity is and that we're not leaving that door open for attack, which I think is what in some cases has happened. For instance, how many of you have used this particular picture? Just by a show of hands, how many of you have used that? Right. So, when you really look at this, you would think, wow, well, this is a great analogy. This explains and shows exactly the difference between equality, equity, and even justice. But when you look at under equality, everyone has a box that they're standing on. But when you look at equity, we've taken the box from one person. And while that one person in this particular picture is a person of color, we've still taken something from that person to give to someone else, which is sort of what Catherine mentioned a little earlier. This is tool right there for those that are opposing DE&I, and especially the word equity, to say, wait a minute, why are you taking from me or taking from someone else to give to someone? That's not equity. So I would challenge all of you to think about using this particular image, okay? Everyone has what they need to gain access, to grab the fruit from the tree, to have a bite of the fruit. No, nothing has been taken from someone else. This is really, truly the depiction of equity. Any questions or comments?
So one of the things that I got told in using that, and the first picture is the one that I have used before. People talked about whether or not folks actually deserve things or didn't deserve things, and they didn't believe that when we talk about equity, that we talk about somebody starting from a disadvantaged position. So they didn't necessarily believe the idea that the person who was shorter than the other necessarily needed the other box, because it would be about whether or not they had earned or somehow, what am I trying to say, could magic themselves in the height. I don't know how better to say that. So it was really that started a conversation about advantages and disadvantages of where people started from, and so it was a larger conversation. But it was interesting that that was the perspective, and that's what came out of that. It was the first time that I'd been challenged like that. It was like I said, it was about 6 months ago. But that's a part of the conversation that frankly I wasn't prepared for, and I have to go back and kind of start looking at how do I address that if that comes up again.
Sure. And I would recommend you think about bridging in their privilege and identifying privilege and understanding, because sometimes, and most times, okay, people who have privilege don't really realize that they have the privilege until it's taken away. Okay, so why would someone have to have merit? Okay, why would someone have to have earned a box to stand on? What was it that the other person had that they didn't have? A natural height difference. So do we penalize people for who they are? Because that's what that would be the question to ask in that particular situation. Because we're not supposed to be penalizing anyone. Everyone should be welcomed, right? And included and given access.
I
So
like
that
the
would be,
reframe a lot. Thank you.
you're welcome. You're welcome. So let's take a look at some of the trends that are happening with DE&I. Now, Ken and I both are members of the Society for Human Resource Management, a short called SHRM. And this is from our CEO, Johnny C. Taylor. How many of you, by a show of hands, are members of SHRM as well? Okay. How many have heard what Johnny has said? Okay, Ken, go ahead and play the video and then we'll have a discussion.
But when you say the E, that's where everything breaks down.
Yeah.
Because people are either pro-E or anti-E. And what we find is 70% or so are anti-E.
Yeah.
And they're just like, I'm not anti-E, the concept of equity. We understand that equity undergirds this all. We're just not sure if at the end of the day, the focus on it doesn't distract us from achieving the I and the D explicitly. So it's a nuanced point. We're committed to it, but can you do it in the context of an inclusive workplace, as opposed to calling it out, since it's such a tough term? Some people are going to immediately shut down just at the mentioning of it.
Yeah.
And so if that's the case, and if you're genuinely committed to this work, Johnny, SHRM, HR practitioners, are you willing to sort of die on the sword for the E when we're saying we're going to get the E, but we're going to focus on the I and the D, where there's agreement?
So please come off mute, raise your hands, and let's go one by one. What did you think of that? Our DE&I professionals on this call, removing the E from the work, or at least from the acronyms, not using it.
Well, I'll start off with you, Brenda. I think that is definitely something to consider, because he's right. The one area there that is based on a person's individual perception is the E. right? Equity, your definition of equity is rooted in how you may have been raised, where you may have been raised, your family, cultural structure, your socialization, and to everyone. If you have 5 people in the room, you'll get 5 different definitions of what equity is or what equality is. And I think it can be something that will kind of stall progress. And that's where I took from what Johnny was saying, that it can stall progress. But if we focus on inclusion, then we can achieve equity along the way, but we could remove that distractor, which is the letter E, the equity, right? Elsa.
Yeah, please be patient with me while I articulate this, but that was infuriating for me to watch, just because if we are inclusive and diverse but not equitable, then do we start to create separate spaces for people? Does that not revert back to separate but equal? If we are inclusive of somebody who's in a wheelchair, we're more diverse, but we didn't build a ramp for them to be able to come. So like, I don't understand. It sounds terrible to see somebody, especially a person of color, argue against not creating equity. Equity and belonging is the goal of our initiatives. So I
Right.
think it's a huge step back.
Yeah. So what that short cut that we gave you there from Johnny explaining Sherm's move, what you didn't hear is that Sherm is still steadfast and committed to equity, but what they're trying to do is remove the word equity from the vernacular, saying focusing on inclusion and diversity, making sure that equity is happening and that it's a part of inclusion when you're including someone. In the case of the person with the wheelchair, you've not only have you included them, but you're making sure that there's a ramp for them to get in, that there
Not
is a
with
way.
not with us.
That was his intention on shifting the focus to make sure that as HR professionals, what we have the power to do, or what we have the ability to drive, is inclusion. We have the ability to drive diversity. And if we use those 2 driving forces and make sure that we embed equity in them, then we're still doing the work. We've just taken the word away. And I can tell you that a part of me personally, I feel like, okay, are we then doing some kind of, being adaptable, right? But are we shadowing, putting a shadow over ourselves, okay? What are we actually doing? But we need to get the work done. The work needs to be done. If the people at the table are afraid to make changes because they can't even hear us because of the word equity, then let's remove the word equity, but let's still keep doing the work. That's what Johnny was saying. Anyone else have any thoughts? No, it's controversial. If there's anything in the chat, I can't see the chat. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, there's a lot of people agree with Elsa, and Elsa made some very valid points. So I appreciate your contributions. It's been defined as white centering, removing the name of their comfort, removing the name equity for their actual comfort,
Right.
just so that they will remain comfortable. We'll take the E out, and we'll do it more covertly behind the scenes as opposed to attacking it head on more overtly. So then they're also pushing back on the word diversity, which we've seen that over time. I just saw today in the news feed, a major organization, they just removed all of their ERGs and they set up one ERG. And I was like, wow, that's a major move there. Right.
That
So
is a major one.
yeah, and we don't know if that's going to resonate across. Someone said censorship. right, is never the best answer, and they're perceiving that as being as participating or supporting censorship. Um,
I know only time will tell if this is really going to be the way to go. I think as a committed, and I say committed volunteer and member of SHRM for quite a number of years, before they made this decision, I would have loved for them to have reached out and truly included all of their members to ask that question instead of going with a study, and the study that was probably done with only CEOs and COOs and CFOs, right?
right, which is a control group, right? That group is very
Exactly.
controlled, so the responses are going to be controlled. But I will say one thing for Mr. Taylor. He did say that if he's wrong, then he will go back and make adjustments. He did say that, right? So he understands, just based on the feedback, that there's a possibility that, things can go either way. So, and someone says here, and maybe those CEOs and CFOs are not people of color.
More than likely they are not. That is right.
And then the thing, let's not get caught in the color vacuum, right? Because we know DE&I is much more than that. Just like Elsa spoke about accessibility for a person that's abled, right? Even though the ADA covers a lot of that accessibility for, in an employment space, that's something to consider as well. Catherine had her hand up. Catherine.
Thanks. I was just gonna say that I think that it's really putting off the table a very important conversation. That if it is okay for people to disagree about equity, let's talk about it. Let's bring it out. Let's have those conversations. I can understand when we're talking money that it gets really complicated. That if we made each of those boxes money, and then all of a sudden you're asking me to just give money away, or asking the person who's the tallest to just no longer have that money because they can get what they need without that money, there's a lot of discomfort, a lot of things to have kind of conversations around this stuff. So but let's talk about it. Let's have these conversations. Let's have even the disagreements. Let's have the little whatever else. Whereas if you just say, oh, well, it's becoming a little more subversive, which I understand, like we kind of maybe have to, like sometimes we got to get creative when the movements change to be like, okay, well, we're not going to like get rid of equity. We're just going to put it under here. Or how about you say, no, tell me why you don't like it. Tell me why we don't have this. Bring those to those tables. Let's keep talking about it and keep discussing it. And in doing so, I think it keeps it as a king thing, because in my mind, equity is almost the most important thing. But that's just my opinion.
Thanks for your opinion. Yeah. So in the essence of time, I think we need to push through, Brenda, because we're getting close to a timeline.
Yeah, I see that. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So let's see, addressing misinformation in the workplace, some of the things that could be done. Okay,
We've got to be proactive. We've got to make sure that we are addressing concerns, myths, things that we hear that we know is wrong. Take the time right then to address it. Be proactive, have the conversation. Seek commonality. Remember that we all have more things in common than we do differences, and point them out. And again, being that proactive person and promote those civil conversations. Use the time to educate. And as I mentioned earlier, use your data to measure. And remember that the work that we do, if it's not being measured, then we cannot show the progress. And every company, every organization has different KPIs. Some are similar, but know your KPIs and measure them. Know your starting point and where you're going. Make sure that you report those findings when you need to. Be transparent with everything, but report those findings. I recommend doing that annually. If you can do it more often, then do so. And be honest. If there are things in there that are not good, show it. And have reasons or ways to fix it. What are we going to do? and be okay with resetting. Some of the key takeaways, you want to go ahead with that, Ken?
Sure. Understand the historic context of DE&I. And just like I had to tell my young cousin, this is not something new. Although it may be new to you and it's getting a lot of visibility in the media, this is not new. This has been going on for years, months, and days. And DE&I, the concept of DEI is not divisive. It's more inclusive than anything else. Ongoing relevance of DE&I, keep it important. Whether it's for the I, the D, the E, the A, the B, keep it important. Continue to do the necessary work that needs to be done so that we can have a better work environment, because that's really what it's all about. It's about the work environment, and it's going to transcend across every component of our lives. And the reason it's starting at work, it's because that's where we spend most of the time at. We spend more time at work than we spend anywhere else. Understand the business case for DE&I. Thought leadership is powerful. If you're all about making money, and I know that was something that was said earlier, if you're really about making money, then you should really be about having a diverse team, diverse team, because a diverse team gives you different perspectives. It will give you stuff that you probably hadn't even realized, right? And you never know what experience or background an individual may have. Be proactive, as Brenda mentioned in the previous slide. Don't wait, take that first step if you need to. But more importantly, be respectful when you're having conversations. It's okay to disagree. As we saw today, a lot of people chimed in and they were not in agreement with the perspective on the E, if you would. And that's fine. That's perfectly okay. But just be civil. Respect people. You never know what someone's going through, and everyone has the right to voice their opinion. So before we leave today, we have a couple tools which Amber will be sending out to you, some things that you can put in your own personal toolkit to continue to help you along this journey, some resources that are available as well. And then you'll also get a set of references that we use for today's workshop as we sat down and we thought about how to best discuss DE&I without having an inflammatory discussion. And I think we did pretty good. And everyone didn't agree, right? Well, they say agree to disagree. No, we didn't agree to disagree. We just respected other people's opinion, which is what civility is all about. And then
And I'd like for you to know that as one of those key takeaways, this work will continue. There is a business case for it. And when Chief Human Resource Officers were surveyed at the end of 2023, over nearly 80% of them said that they were continuing the work and that they were going to none had planned to reduce their DEI initiatives, their policies or programs, and almost 2/3 expected to focus their efforts on attracting diverse talent. So the work continues. We have to just make sure that we are being proactive and that we are taking the time to have those courageous conversations about what diversity, equity, inclusion truly is in this totally time of polarization, okay? My final thought, DEI is an ongoing journey that requires adaptability. It requires respect, empathy, and an intentional commitment to creating an inclusive and equitable workplace for all. And if it were easy, everyone would be doing it and we would all be out of jobs.
Excellent point. Excellent point. If it was easy, yeah. People are just really comfortable being comfortable, right? But to do this
Right.
work,
You
you
have to be
have to
stretched.
be uncomfortable on a regular basis, because there's always something that's going to pop up. If you work in a traditional HR role, you would know exactly what I'm talking about. Just when you think you're ahead of the game, something pops up, and now you're in a situation where you got to go to your uncomfortable zone. And in this type of work, you typically work in a zone of discomfort on a regular basis. So
What I like to say, and what I tell folks here in Chatham County and across the state of North Carolina, when I'm talking about DE&I, get comfortable being uncomfortable. We don't grow unless we're stretched, and be okay with being stretched.
it's
Do we
very
have any questions or comments that anyone would like to make?